remember when my life seemed perfect. If you had seen me back then, you might have even said I was the perfect wife, the example of what a marriage should be. Luther and I, well, we were the couple everyone admired. Our house was always spotless. The kids were always clean, well taken care of, and there was a homemade dinner on the table every night. When we got married, Luther had a good job and everything seemed to be going well. We bought a house together and soon started a family. He wanted 3 kids, and I gave him exactly that. Even when he was laid off during my 3rd pregnancy, I stayed strong. I was in my 3rd trimester with 2 small children already at home, but I managed to take on temporary jobs to help out. I took pride in being the woman who could keep the house clean, the kids fed, and still contribute to paying the bills. To me, that was love. Supporting Luther, being the perfect wife, a dedicated mother, and doing everything for the sake of our family. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking that other women in my generation didn't understand what it meant to fight for their marriage the way I did. I felt honored to be that kind of woman. When Luther finally found another job, it seemed like everything would go back to normal. I was relieved, of course, but deep down, I felt like something was starting to change. We were still together, our kids had grown and started their own families. And we had become that couple with a quiet, empty house. The empty nest, as they say. I thought it was just another phase, that it was normal. After all, our entire life had been built on things. Sacrifice, commitment, and above all, the perfect marriage. I thought I knew what perfection was. But slowly, I would learn that this illusion was about to crumble. Then came the diagnosis. Breast cancer. Everything changed so fast that I could hardly breathe. It felt like the world around me collapsed in seconds. During that appointment, the doctor told us that it had been caught early, and there were good chances for treatment. I thought Luther would be by my side, that he would support me, that together we would overcome this just like we had overcome everything before. But when I looked at him, something was wrong. He went rigid. I thought it was fear of losing me, fear of facing this battle. But even when the doctor gave us good news about my chances of recovery, Luther remained distant. I thought he needed time to process everything. Who wouldn't? At first, he came with me to the appointments. He was there by my side, worried. But then he started missing them. He didn't show up for the 2nd appointment, then the 3rd. And at home, he could barely look at me. I was sick from the chemotherapy, vomiting through the night, and he just disappeared. He'd leave for work, come home late, and always had an excuse. I tried not to think the worst, but a woman knows, right? Something inside me said that everything was falling apart. It was at the clinic, sitting next to another woman, that something hit me like a cold wave. Many husbands leave their wives when they're diagnosed with cancer, she said casually. At first, I refused to believe it. Luther would never do that to me. But the more he distanced himself, the more that phrase echoed in my mind. I wanted to be wrong. I really did. Until one day, I came home and found a note. A damn note. In it, Luther said he couldn't continue, that he hadn't signed up for this, that he couldn't handle the situation. Just like that, out of nowhere, he simply left me. Years of marriage, 3 children, and the promise of in sickness and in health seemed to mean nothing anymore. The truth was, when I got sick, he simply wasn't prepared to support me. And so, after a lifetime of dedication, I found myself alone, fighting not only cancer but also abandonment. When he left, I was paralyzed. It was like the ground had disappeared from under me. But the truth is, things got worse. It wasn't just the abandonment. I was still processing being sick and alone, but soon I realized that Luther hadn't just left. He had taken almost everything. I went to my lawyer and discovered that the house, the one I had helped buy with my own money, wasn't in my name. Everything was in his name. The accounts, the savings, even the investments. I only had a separate account, and even then, there was hardly any money in it. I never imagined I'd need to protect my own finances from a man I had loved for so many years. He had been planning this long before I realized. The reality hit me like a punch. While I was fighting cancer, he had been planning to leave the marriage and take everything he could. I tried calling him, but he wouldn't answer. And soon, I saw photos of him with another woman on Facebook. I don't know if it was the betrayal, the abandonment, or the cancer that made me feel worse. But what I knew was that I was being erased from his life. The few friends we had in common, none of them answered my calls. It was as if I had stopped existing. I was isolated, more than ever, not knowing who to trust or how to keep going. And then, the divorce papers came. So quickly that I knew he had planned it all even before my diagnosis. But the worst part was he wasn't just trying to move on. He wanted everything. He wanted the house, the money, and he wasn't going to stop until I had nothing left. I felt torn apart, but even so, I refused the idea of a long, dirty battle. My lawyer suggested we gather evidence of his infidelity, try to expose Luther and win in court. But I didn't want to sink into that dirty game. I wanted to be the person I had always been, even if it meant losing. But life has a strange way of pushing us toward the truth. During the process of dividing assets, while I was still in the house, I started finding things that opened my eyes for good. Hotel receipts, gifts I never received, vacations he never took. All of it proving that he had been cheating on me long before I knew. Every image I had of a perfect marriage crumbled right there, among those pieces of evidence. And with it, any trace of love or respect I still had for him vanished. I handed everything over to my lawyer, and right then, I decided I wasn't going to hold back anymore. Not for him, but for me. I was going to fight, but on my terms. I didn't want to be the angry ex-wife he could paint me to be. I wanted to be the woman everyone knew had been betrayed and abandoned. And that's exactly what I was going to be. With those pieces of evidence in my hands, I knew I now had an advantage. But instead of turning it into an open war, I followed a different plan. A plan that would work against him without him even realizing. In the hearings, while my lawyer fought for my rights, I did the opposite of what anyone expected. I showed up looking more worn down with each meeting before the judge, even more fragile due to the chemotherapy. What Luther didn't know, and what I wanted everyone to know, was that I was going through one of the hardest moments of my life. Fighting a disease while also facing the end of my marriage. Every time I was called to speak, I lowered my voice, stayed calm and serene, and said, "I just want to resolve this fairly, without any resentment." I could see the discomfort on Luther's face. Every time I presented myself as understanding, still wanting to handle things civilly, he grew more frustrated. Even his lawyer started giving him suspicious looks. Slowly and discreetly, I was tearing down his image. Meanwhile, Luther continued demanding more than he deserved. He wanted the house, a chunk of the savings, even a portion of my retirement. It was as if he were trying to crush me, to take everything from me. But my plan was working, and he had no idea. With each hearing, the judge leaned more in my favor. And in the end, almost all of Luther's demands were denied. The ruling was clear. The house would stay with me, along with part of the savings and the retirement. Luther left that courtroom with almost nothing. He still had his job, earned a good salary, but what he really wanted, what he felt he deserved, was denied. And you know what? He couldn't handle it. I thought that once the divorce was finalized and he was left with nothing more to take, things would settle down. But what I didn't know was that, outside of the courts, Luther was living an even bigger lie. He had moved in with his girlfriend, the younger woman, and seemed to be living the perfect life. I saw the photos. They were having fancy dinners, going on luxurious vacations, all with the money he still managed to earn. Even with the courts ruling in my favor, it felt like somehow he was still winning. I hated it. I hated seeing that while I was still fighting for my health and trying to rebuild myself, he had moved on as if nothing had ever happened. But then, the perfect opportunity came to turn the tables once and for all. One day, I had to go to Luther's office. There were some papers that needed his signature, things that could have been handled by our lawyers, but I saw an opportunity. I dressed simply, almost looking worn down, with my headscarf due to the chemotherapy and a mask covering part of my face. I knew that in that office, everyone still knew me as the perfect wife I had once been, and I wanted them to see what was left of that image. When I walked into the office, the stares hit me like thunder. People knew we were divorcing, of course, but they had no idea I was sick. They now saw me as a shadow of the woman I had once been, and I knew rumors would spread. The less I said, the more assumptions would do the work for me. Luther was furious when he saw me. Of course, he hadn't expected me to show up, especially in that state. But I acted like nothing was wrong, like I was just there to settle what needed to be settled. I handed him the papers, and he signed them, barely masking his irritation. Before leaving, I made sure to stop by his assistant's desk, the one who had always been so polite to me. She asked how I was doing, and with the weakest, softest voice I could muster, I said, "Oh, you know, the cancer and all has been really hard. Chemotherapy is horrible." I saw the shock in her eyes, and I knew that within hours the whole office, maybe the entire building, would know the truth about Luther, the man who abandoned his sick wife. But I didn't stop there. That same week, I went to Ronald's house, Luther's brother. I had gathered a box of Luther's things and brought it with me. When Ronald opened the door, his face changed when he saw me. "Rose, what's going on? You're sick." And finally, I said the words I had been holding in. "Yes, Ron, I have cancer, and Luther left me because of it." The shock was immediate. Ronald didn't know. No one knew. I explained that I didn't want to worry anyone, that I was trying to get better before telling people, but that I had to move on with my life. His wife, Wendy, was furious when she heard it all. I asked them not to tell my kids yet, as I wanted to wait until I was healthier to talk to them. But I knew that, just like at the office, the news would spread. And it did. What I didn't expect was that, at some point, Luther would show up at the house. It was right after a chemotherapy session. I was at home, still feeling weak, trying to recover. The kitchen door was unlocked, as always, and he walked in, as if he still had some right to be there. And do you know what the first thing he said was? "How did you manage to destroy my life?" I was exhausted, but at the same time, incredulous. How had I, the woman he had abandoned, ruined his life? "You ruined my reputation," he said, seething, and I realized his girlfriend had left him, which wasn't, of course, my fault. But there he was, this man I had once loved, blaming me for all his failures. He accused me of playing the martyr, of turning everyone against him. And as he ranted, I just stared at him, not responding. Then something changed in his eyes, and he snapped. He lunged toward me, hands raised as if he were going to hit me, and for a second I thought it was the end. But then the door opened again. Wendy came in. Behind her, my 3 children, all of them together at the exact moment Luther revealed his true self. Anthony, my oldest, didn't hesitate. He grabbed his father and pushed him out of the house, with my other son helping. Luther didn't stand a chance. My family stood by me, protecting me, and I went to the bathroom, nauseous, but more relieved than I had ever been. Luther disappeared from our lives that day. No friends, no family, no one wanted anything to do with him after that. And as for me, I was free. My kids gave me a bit of grief for keeping everything from them, but in the end, they understood I needed that time. When the doctor finally told me I was in remission, my daughter Anna begged me to move in with her, and I did. Since then, my life has been much happier, lighter, freer. I no longer judge anyone for not wanting to get married or have kids. Life is what we make of it, and I know now that what truly matters is being surrounded by people we love and who truly love us. And that's what I ended up with after all. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect with Chad. He was exactly what I needed. You know, that person who comes into your life at just the right moment? He was sweet, kind, and had this practical way of solving things that made me feel at ease. At that point in my life, things were a bit messy, both work-wise and personally, and he seemed to be the calm I needed. I felt safe with him. We started dating about a year before the pandemic hit. Up until then, everything was going well. We'd go out for dinner, watch movies together, and honestly, I thought I'd found someone who made my life flow in such an easy way. He was that kind of boyfriend everyone knows well, you know? Helpful, always trying to make things better around us. He was the guy people would say, he's a keeper. So, when the world turned upside down with the pandemic, we decided to move in together. At the time, it seemed like an obvious choice. Not only for creating that safety bubble everyone was talking about, but also for financial reasons. The timing was perfect. My apartment lease was about to expire, and my landlord was super flexible about letting me move out without penalty. Felt like everything was falling into place. We moved our stuff with the help of a moving company that was still operating, and soon we were setting up our life together. Chad, of course, being the tech guy he was, set up our home office. He made sure to create separate spaces so we could work from home without everything turning into a mess. Me, well, I just went with the flow, trusting him. If only I knew then what I know now. He always seemed to have the answers for everything. While I was adjusting to the new rhythm of life, he was there, organizing our workspace, managing meetings, and making sure our co-living was smooth. At first, it felt almost like a dream. I worked fewer hours than him, so I always had a bit of time to myself at the end of the day. I started cooking more, reading more, even got back into exercising. We were building a routine that seemed healthy and balanced. And for a while, I truly believed Chad was the best thing that had ever happened to me. We laughed more, ate meals together, and even our intimate life got better. While many couples were crumbling under the pressure of the pandemic, I felt like we were growing stronger. But you know how it is. Sometimes what seems perfect on the surface hides something much darker underneath. Over time, I began to notice that something was changing with Chad. First, it was little things. He seemed more tired, more stressed. His company was demanding more from him, but his salary wasn't increasing, and he was spending hours and hours trapped in the makeshift office we had set up. I could see how much it was draining him. I suggested that he take more breaks, step away from the computer every now and then. "Chad, you need some time for yourself," I'd say. He'd smile but wouldn't stop. It was like the work was consuming him entirely. I knew he wasn't getting paid extra for all that effort, so I started researching how to create a better separation between work and personal life, even within the home. That's when I had an idea. With the money we'd been saving, I decided to buy him a gift. A new computer, but this time, not for work. It was a computer for him to play games, relax, and disconnect. I went to a store and asked for help picking out the right model. I didn't know anything about technology, so I trusted the salesperson to make sure it was something Chad would really like. When I gave him the gift, he was surprised but grateful. I made it clear, this one is just for fun. No work on this. When you're done with the workday, come here, play, relax. At first, it seemed to help. He started laughing more, loosening up. We went back to eating meals together, laughing like before, and even our intimate moments were better. But after a while, something changed. He started using that computer more and more. I thought he was just playing games with friends, which was great. He needed that escape. Sometimes I'd walk into the office to grab something and see him laughing, chatting with his friends online. Everything seemed to be going well. Or at least that's what I thought. What I didn't realize at the time was that Chad wasn't just playing games. There was something else going on, something I had no idea about. It wasn't until everything started to unravel that I understood what he was really doing during all those hours at the computer. I just wanted him to be happy, but without knowing, I had handed him the key to something much darker. It was on a random afternoon that my friend Paula sent me a strange message. She asked how things were going with me and work. I replied that everything was great because honestly, that's what I believed. I was fine, my relationship with Chad seemed stable, and even my remote job was going smoothly. But then Paula asked a question that left me confused. Is everything really okay with work? I thought it was odd but didn't think too much of it at the time. I told her yes, everything was fine, and the conversation moved on without her bringing it up again. At that moment, it didn't seem important, but that was the beginning of the unraveling. A while later, I started noticing other strange things. Once, I walked into the office while Chad was playing with his friends and heard a sentence that made me freeze. One of his friends said something like, "Man, she's so hot. I can't believe you pulled that off." I didn't think much of it at the time because, honestly, I'd heard comments like that from friends of past boyfriends. It wasn't uncommon. I was so used to receiving compliments casually that I didn't pick up on the different tone it had. It wasn't until everything came crashing down that I realized what it really meant. A few weeks later, I texted our friend Julie, asking how she was doing. I missed my friends, you know? It was tough not seeing people in person for so long. When she replied, her message shocked me. Sorry, Elle. I just can't be friends with someone who's doing that kind of thing. You could have talked to me if you were having money problems. I was completely lost. What kind of thing? I asked. And then Julie called me. On the phone, she was hesitant, like she was scared to tell me what she knew. That's when she dropped the bomb. Everyone's saying you opened an OnlyFans account. And it's not just that. There are videos of you on websites, you know, intimate videos. I went silent. For a second, I thought it was some kind of horrible joke. I had never done anything like that. I didn't even know how OnlyFans worked. But then she sent me links. And to my horror, there they were, photos, videos, images of me, or at least they looked like me. Some were clearly edited with my face on bodies I didn't recognize, but others were real videos, recorded in my home without my knowledge. Footage of me in the living room working out. Other clips of me cooking in the kitchen, filmed from angles I never should have been. I went into a full-blown panic. I started crying on the phone, not understanding how it had happened. I would never, ever have done something like that. But Julie kept showing me more and more, and it finally hit me. This wasn't edited. The cameras we had in the house, the ones I thought were for our safety, Chad was using them for something completely different. And worse, he was selling those. When the call ended, I went straight to the room where Chad was. I was out of control, screaming, asking how he could do such a thing. He tried to hold me back, tried to stop me from destroying the computer, and while his friends probably listened to everything on Discord, I kept yelling. And he looked me straight in the eyes with the most shameless expression and said, "I don't know what you're." That was the first time I saw the real Chad. I was completely beside myself. I was yelling, crying, trying to understand how someone I loved could do this to me. But Chad, he just laughed. He stopped pretending he didn't know what I was talking about, stopped trying to fool me, and started laughing. Cold, almost arrogant laugh. Then he said, I looked at him, stunned. What did he mean I wasn't going anywhere? I was about to grab my things and leave that house, but he wouldn't let me. He moved closer, with that disturbing smile, and told me I would never leave him because he had more than I could imagine. I have worse videos, worse pictures. If you leave me, I'll post everything. I'll make sure everyone sees it. Your parents, your job, everyone. I could hardly breathe. Fear gripped me. He had more? More photos? More videos? How? And worse, if he had already posted things online, what else was he capable of? At that moment, I felt completely trapped. It wasn't just my personal life at risk. He was threatening my friendships, my family, my job, and he knew exactly how to manipulate me. I couldn't just run away. He controlled everything. I dropped my bag on the floor, too drained to fight. I asked, almost as a plea, why? Why did you do this to me? I felt like I deserved at least an explanation. And that's when he told me the truth with no remorse. He had gotten a pay cut, a big one, and he didn't like that I was earning more than him. I hated that, he said. That's not how things should be. And that's why he decided to make money another way. Instead of finding an honest way, he decided to use my image, my body, my privacy, without me knowing. I wondered why he hadn't done this to himself. He could have made an OnlyFans account, used his own image. But he just laughed, telling me no one would pay as much as they had for me. That devastated me. I had done everything for him. I tried to be the perfect partner. I cooked, took care of the house, did everything to make our life good, to keep our relationship strong. And in the end, he betrayed me in the worst way possible. He had turned me into a commodity, and still I couldn't just leave. He had already exposed parts of my life I never imagined sharing, and now he was threatening to do even worse. The images were already circulating, and what else could he do? He had ensnared me in a cycle of fear and control. I needed a plan, couldn't just leave. He would destroy me. That's when I decided that if I wanted to escape, I had to be stealthy. I had to play his game. I knew if I wanted to get out of this, I had to be smart. I couldn't confront Chad directly, he had all the control. So, I decided to play his game, pretending I was accepting the situation. That night, while I was still trying to collect myself, I did something that made me sick, but it had to be done. I sat down with him, tried to look calm, and said, "If this is what you want, then I want control too." He seemed confused at first, but then his face lit up with expectation. "I want to see everything. I want the passwords. I want to know what's being posted. If we're going to make money off this, I need to have control too." He smiled, a victorious smile, as if he had finally bent me to his will. To Chad, this seemed like the best possible scenario. He saw me as a partner now. To him, I had accepted the situation. I was all in. Of course, he didn't know I had a plan behind all of this. I needed control, but in a way that he wouldn't notice. So he showed me everything. He explained how he managed the accounts, gave me the passwords, and showed me all the videos, all the photos, even the conversations with subscribers. I was completely disgusted, but I kept up the act. I told him he was right, that if we were going to keep this up, we needed to do things more authentically. He believed me. In the following days, I slowly took control. Chad got busier at work since his company had restored part of his salary, and I started handling more of the accounts. Little by little, I became the one posting, responding to messages, interacting with the fans. He was happy, thinking we were becoming a profitable duo. But what he didn't know was that, with every step, I was getting ready to end it all. When he talked to me about payments, I told him I didn't care about the money, that he could keep managing the finances. That kept him busy, and while he did that, I made decisions about everything else. When he started to suspect I might be trying to get out of it, I distracted him, making him believe it was all part of a bigger plan, that if I took more control, we'd make even more money. And that's when the moment came. When Chad finally relaxed, thinking everything was under control, I changed the passwords to all the accounts. And not just that, I deleted everything I could. I removed photos, videos, blocked access, and added extra security layers to make sure he couldn't recover anything. When he asked me about the accounts, I coldly said, "Now it's my turn to control things. I know what attracts people more. Just relax." He got suspicious, of course. He tried to confront me, saying I couldn't just take over everything. But then came the final blow. He threatened to release everything to my family, to my job, like he always did. And I responded, firmly, "If you do that, I'll tell everyone you've been posting intimate videos of me without my consent. You'll be charged with revenge porn or whatever's illegal." I saw fear on his face for the first time. He knew that if I went through with it, he'd be finished. His reputation, his freedom, everything would be at stake. So he backed off. For the first time, he felt cornered. And that's how I got out. He stopped blackmailing me, and slowly I started deleting all the accounts, the photos, the videos. Some things, of course, were still out there. What goes online never truly disappears. But the most important thing was that I was free. I had freed myself from Chad and that nightmare. I grabbed my things and left. The best part? He didn't even try to stop me. In fact, he had already erased me from his life. He deleted everything, including the memories we had. To him, I was just a point of shame, and all he wanted was for me to disappear. The following week, I moved into a new apartment with the money I'd managed to pull from those accounts before he wiped them. I slowly rebuilt my life, piece by piece. Not everything went back to normal, of course. Some scars are permanent. But the most important thing was that I was free of him, his manipulations, and his control. And Chad? I never heard from him again. After a year in college, I realized that world just wasn't for me. I felt out of place, like I was forcing something that didn't make sense. While everyone around me seemed to shine with excitement about classes and future plans, All I could think about was how much I didn't belong there. So I made the decision to drop out. Of course, my parents hated the idea. It didn't take long before I had to move out of the dorms, and going back to my parents' house wasn't an option. They were furious. That's when my brother, Luke, stepped in like some kind of savior. He and his wife, Miriam, had a basement apartment in their house. It was a space they usually rented out on Airbnb, but Luke was tired of dealing with guests, and he offered me the place for a third of the rent. Of course, he was super generous, telling me I didn't need to start paying until I found a job. I was so grateful. What I didn't know at the time was that Miriam, his wife, wasn't as happy about it as he was. Now, let me tell you about Miriam. She's different. And by different, I mean we're complete opposites. I'm, well, robust. I've never been skinny, and I know part of that comes from genetics. My whole family is like this. We love food. And me, I love food. To me, food isn't just fuel, it's an experience. I try to keep up with some exercise, I do online Zumba and move around when I can. But the truth is, I've always been a girl with a big appetite. Miriam, on the other hand, is practically a magazine cover model from the 2000s. Slim, super controlled with her diet, the kind of person who eats a handful of almonds and calls it a meal. She's always made it clear she didn't really like me. It wasn't like she was openly rude. It was more like she tolerated me because she had no choice, you know? From the day we met, I felt like she didn't approve of me. But up until then, I didn't really care. We didn't see each other much, so it was easy to ignore. That all changed once I moved into their basement. And right from the start, I realized that being this close to Miriam wasn't going to be easy. On my first night moving in, while I was still unpacking my bags, Luke went upstairs to check on something in the house, and Miriam stayed behind, watching me. I could feel her eyes on me, like she was analyzing my every move. I tried to break the ice, telling her how grateful I was for them letting me stay, and that I'd already started looking for a job. But all she did was cross her arms and ask in a cold voice, "How long do you think you'll be staying here?" I was caught off guard. I didn't have an exact answer. I told her I was applying to several places, a cafe, a pizzeria, even a nicer restaurant. I said as soon as I found a job, I'd start paying rent. I was trying to stay optimistic, but she just stared at me, not saying a word. In that moment, I knew my stay here would be more complicated than I'd imagined. That first week, things got weirder. I did my best to stay in my space in the basement, only coming up for dinner with Luke and Miriam when he insisted. During those meals, her behavior began to shift. She didn't say much, but when she did speak, it was always small comments that left me feeling uncomfortable. One night, we were having dinner, and Luke had made an amazing meal. He's always been great in the kitchen. After serving myself a first helping, I decided to grab a little more. That's when Miriam, in a controlled tone, said, "How can you eat so much?" I nearly choked on my food. The comment was so blunt, so full of disdain, that Luke stopped what he was doing and looked at her. He seemed as shocked as I was, but I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, I'm a big girl, you know? People like me eat a lot." I laughed, hoping it would ease the tension, but Miriam wasn't amused. She looked at me, not even cracking a smile, and said, "Being obese isn't funny. You need to start thinking about your future. Eating like this is going to cause problems down the line." Then she started talking about discipline with food, how the women in her family were always taught to maintain their weight and care about their appearance. "People judge based on appearance," she said, with that tone like she was giving me a lesson. I felt a knot in my stomach. Not from the food, but from what she was implying. I knew I wasn't skinny, but this was my life, not hers. Luke tried to change the subject, sharing funny stories from our childhood, and I went along with it, but Miriam spent the rest of the evening quietly picking at her food, barely eating anything. In the following days, she stopped talking about it. Instead, she started making small changes around the house. One day, I went upstairs to cook something and noticed there was a lock on a few of the kitchen cabinets. It confused me because I had my own small kitchen in the basement, and she didn't even seem interested in eating most of the stuff that was locked up. I didn't understand what was going on, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to cause more tension, but something really started to bother me when I began losing things. One day, I had to leave for a job interview and couldn't find my keys. I searched the entire basement apartment, dug through my bag, my pockets, everything. Nothing. I went upstairs to ask if she had seen them, and with the most indifferent look, Miriam just said, "No, I haven't." She didn't even look up from whatever she was reading. I asked if she could help me look, and she simply said she was busy. "Maybe you should walk to your interview. A little exercise would be good for you." At that moment, I knew something was off. She clearly didn't want me there, and everything I did seemed to annoy her. I ended up taking the bus to the interview, and on the way, I called Luke, asking him if he could check if my keys had fallen somewhere. He didn't know anything but said he'd look when he got home. Later that day, when I got back to the apartment, Luke handed me the keys. He had found them in the garden near the flower beds. Now, that made no sense. I had never been to the garden, nor had I gone near the flowers because the pollen made me sneeze. But I let it go, trying not to overthink it. From that point on, I started to realize Miriam was playing a game. Little sabotages here and there. Things that made me feel like I wasn't welcome in that house. Things really started to fall apart the day Miriam finally snapped. Up until that point, it had just been small comments and subtle sabotages. But that day, everything came to a head. I was trying to move on with my life, you know? I'd gone to more interviews, trying to get settled, but it was starting to get tough. I'd received several rejections, and I was getting discouraged. Finally, I got a positive response from a local pizzeria. A simple job, but it was exactly what I needed to start paying rent. But then something strange happened. During the call to confirm my hire, the manager said something that caught me off guard. He mentioned that he almost didn't hire me because someone had called the restaurant to warn them that I had a habit of stealing food from places I worked at. I was in shock. How? Who would do something like that? I had never stolen anything in my life, let alone food, and suddenly, it hit me. I knew exactly who was behind this. Miriam. She knew where I was applying for jobs because Luke always mentioned it at dinner. She was purposefully trying to sabotage my life, doing everything she could to get me out of there. The problem was, I had no way of proving it, and accusing her without evidence would only make things worse. So, I decided the best thing I could do was keep my head down and move on. I accepted the job at the pizzeria and started distancing myself from Luke and Miriam, avoiding as much contact as possible. But then, the worst happened. It was my day off and I was doing laundry. The basement apartment didn't have its own washer, so I had to go upstairs to use the machine. I was trying to be discreet, doing my best not to bother Miriam, but as soon as I started loading the clothes, she appeared. And there, in the middle of the laundry room, she just exploded. Miriam stormed into the room with wide eyes and started yelling at me, saying I had to leave her house immediately. She couldn't stand me anymore. "You don't belong here. I don't want you in my house," she screamed, completely unhinged. I stood there, shocked, trying to stay calm, but my heart was racing. I told her I would leave as soon as I was financially stable, that I'd started working and would soon have my own place. But she didn't want to hear it. She was so out of control that, all of a sudden, she lunged at me, grabbing my hair and shoving me out of the laundry room. That's when I lost it. I defended myself, pushing her back. But in the heat of the moment, I didn't realize my own strength. She stumbled against the wall with a loud thud and started screaming that I had attacked her. Before I could react, she grabbed the phone and started dialing the police, saying she had been assaulted. At that moment, Luke walked in, completely confused, seeing his wife screaming on the floor and me standing there in shock, trying to explain what had happened. Everything happened so fast. Miriam kept insisting that I had attacked her without reason, and I was desperately trying to tell Luke my side of the story, but she kept shouting that she was calling the police, that I was dangerous, and I couldn't stay in the house another minute. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing I could think of. I called my parents. Minutes later, the police arrived, along with my parents. I had never been in a situation like this before and was completely terrified. The officers listened to both sides, but thankfully, my dad managed to convince them to let us resolve everything within the family, without escalating things further. But Miriam kept pushing for a restraining order. She wanted me out no matter what. I was devastated, and all I wanted was to get away from there. So, with no other options, I asked my parents to take me away. I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. After that confrontation, everything changed. I left with my parents that night without even looking back. I was crushed, emotionally drained, and Miriam's rage still echoed in my head. I knew this was exactly what she wanted. To get me out of the house, drive a wedge between Luke and me, and make me seem like the villain of the story. And in a way, she had succeeded. In the days after leaving, I felt completely defeated. How had I let things get to this point? But slowly, I realized something that gave me strength. I couldn't let Miriam win. I couldn't let her destroy my relationship with my brother or cut me off from my own family. That's when I decided to change my strategy. I called Luke, apologized for all the chaos, and proposed a truce. I made it clear I wouldn't return to his house. That was settled, but I didn't want to lose our relationship. I told him that no matter how Miriam felt about me, he would always be my brother, and I would always be there for him. He seemed relieved, maybe even a little guilty for not stepping in during that fight. We agreed to keep our distance for a while, but that he was always welcome at our parents' house. Over time, I realized that distance was exactly what Miriam wanted, to keep me away, make me seem like a bad influence on Luke. So I decided to do the opposite. I began becoming more present in my brother's life. Not at their house, of course, but in every other way. If he wanted to have lunch with our parents, I'd be there. If he wanted to do something on the weekend, I'd invite him out, always asking if Miriam wanted to come too. Naturally, she rarely accepted. But I noticed that with each invitation I made, with each moment I spent with Luke, she withdrew a little more. The control she seemed to have over him was beginning to slip. Then, I started attending family dinners at Luke and Miriam's house. I'd go with my parents, making a point to be kind, engaging with Luke, and, of course, enjoying the food he prepared, always praising it. It was like I was reclaiming a role in his life, and she hated it. But the key was doing it all subtly. I never provoked her directly. I just showed up as a beloved, present family member. At family gatherings, I became the center of attention. People laughed at my jokes, chatted with me, while Miriam became more and more sidelined. And I knew that was eating her up inside. The truth was, despite everything, I still had my family on my side. And in some ways, that bothered her more than anything else. That's when I realized Miriam wanted me gone from Luke's life. She wanted to erase me, isolate me. But I had an advantage she'd never have. I was blood, I was family. And her? She was slowly losing herself, sinking into her own insecurities. I knew it couldn't last much longer. Miriam was reaching her breaking point, and I was just waiting for the moment she'd finally lose control.
Então chegou o momento que eu estava esperando. Uma explosão de Miriam. A ocasião foi o aniversário de 55 anos do meu pai. Minha mãe especifica um grande churrasco no quintal. E, claro, eu fiz questão de estar lá desde o começo, ajudando com tudo. Lucas e Miriam também foram convidados, e apesar de tudo, Miriam apareceu. Parecia até estar de bom humor, mas eu podia ver nos olhos dela que algo estava diferente. Ela estava mais tensa, mais fechada. Talvez fosse o fato de estar cercada pela minha família, onde ela sabia que, no fundo, não tinha o mesmo espaço que eu. Durante a festa, eu fiz o que sempre faço. Me envolvi com todos. Falei com os amigos e familiares, ajudei com a comida, brinquei com as crianças, fiz piadas. Basicamente, eu estava sendo o centro das atenções, do jeito que Miriam detestava.
E Lucas?
Ele parecia feliz em me ver tão à vontade, rindo com todo mundo, como sempre fazia. Mas o momento decisivo aconteceu no fim da festa. As pessoas estavam começando a ir embora, e eu, como de costume, fui para a cozinha ajudando minha mãe a arrumar as coisas. Estava carregando alguns pratos para dentro quando senti aquela presença familiar atrás de mim.
Era Miriam.
Ela entrou na cozinha, mas dessa vez, algo no olhar dela estava diferente. Não era o desprezo habitual, não era apenas raiva. Ela parecia desesperada. Sem dizer uma palavra, ela caminhou até mim e parou, muito perto, quase invadindo meu espaço pessoal. E foi aí que ela começou. Muito esperado, não é? Ela sussurrou, com uma voz cheia de veneno. Eu sei exatamente o que você está fazendo. Sei que você está tentando virar todos contra mim. Eu a olhei, surpresa, mas não respondi. Ela estava tremenda, completamente fora de si. Você me atacou antes, e agora está atacando meu casamento. Você está tentando fazer Luke voltar contra mim. Eu sei disso. Ela avançou mais, me empurrando contra o balcão da cozinha, e foi nesse momento que percebi que as coisas estavam prestes a sair de controle de vez. Eu tentei manter a calma, mas antes que pudesse dizer qualquer coisa, ela explodiu. Começou a gritar, puxando meu cabelo, exatamente como tinha feito na lavanderia. Você é um inútil, gorda, feia, nunca vai fazer nada da vida.
E Lucas?
Ele vai parar de falar com você, eu vou garantir isso. Eu vou acabar com você. A dor no couro cabeludo era intensa, mas o que me assustava mais era o ódio nos olhos dela. Foi um daqueles momentos em que o tempo parece desacelerar. Eu sabia que se reagisse fisicamente, poderia acabar piorando as coisas. Mas, de repente, senti o puxão cessar. E, quando olhei para trás, vi que Lucas tinha entrado na cozinha, segurando Miriam pelos ombros, afastando-a de mim. Ela se debateu, gritando com ele, me acusando de tentar destruir o casamento deles, de envenenar sua vida.
Mas Luke,
ele olhou para ela de um jeito que eu nunca tinha visto antes. Não havia mais paciência, não havia mais compaixão. Ele simplesmente a demorou e, com uma voz calma, disse, Miriam, já chega. Vai embora. Ela parou, incrédula. Você vai acreditar nela? Depois de tudo o que eu fiz por você. Mas Luke não disse mais nada. Ele apenas a olhou, firme, e repetiu, vai embora. Miriam saiu da cozinha, e eu pude ouvir os murmúrios do lado de fora enquanto ela passava pelas pessoas. Alguns parentes e amigos ouviram o início da briga, e agora estavam todos curiosos, mas ninguém se atreveu a perguntar nada. Luke ficou em silêncio por alguns minutos, e eu também. O clima entre nós era pesado, cheio de coisas não ditas. Ele não pediu desculpas, mas naquele momento, não pedi. O fato de ele ter defendido minha posição, de ter visto finalmente quem Miriam era de verdade, já dizia tudo. Depois daquele dia, as coisas mudaram de vez. Luke e Miriam passaram semanas sem se falar direito, e logo ficou claro que o casamento deles não sobreviveria. Não muito tempo depois, ele entrou com o pedido de desenhos. Miriam tentou jogar a culpa em mim até o fim. Disse a todos que eu era responsável pelo fim do casamento deles, que eu tinha manipulado Luke e arruinado a vida dela. Mas ninguém acreditou. A verdade foi revelada, e as pessoas começaram a ver quem ela realmente era.
Lucas inclusivo.
Ele se mudou para um apartamento próprio, e aos poucos, começou a reconstruir sua vida. E eu? Bem, depois de tudo o caos, finalmente voltei a viver em paz. Consegui me estabilizar no trabalho, me mudei para um pequeno apartamento, e, apesar de tudo, minha relação com Luke ficou mais forte do que nunca.
Miriam?
Nunca mais ouvi falar dela.